Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and I hope all of you are having a fantastic Friday, where today on the program we have, one of our favorite correspondents, Mr. Nathan Evans of Popzara magazine, joining us to talk about a number of different topics. And, we're going to have a lot of fun. Now, before we get into that, just real quick, a couple of things that you should know about, including computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find a link to any articles, videos, reviews, anything that we talk about here on the program today. We'll have it in one place so you can find it easily. Also, be sure while you're there to check out the live video stream, which can also be found over at twitch.tv/Computer America. And then on top of that, the social media contest, which currently on hiatus. We are working with Logitech to get a new prize lined up, and you guys will be the first to know as soon as we get a contest back up and running. But all that and more at computeramerica.com, and hopefully you can join us over there. But in the meantime, we have a radio show to put on, and I think we can just bring on our guest and have a good conversation. So, as I said before, Popzara magazine, they do everything from entertainment to technology reviews to everything in between. Really, it's a very varied website. And happy that the managing editor of the site, Mr. Nathan Evans, can join us. So, Nathan, welcome back onto Computer America. How you doing?
Hey, Ben, what's going on? So, real quick, before we get into anything, I have a PSA for your listeners.
Sure.
So, okay. If anybody's listening to this, here's your PSA, which stands for Public Service Announcement. Mm-hmm. HDR is very confusing. HDR on your Windows PC is very confusing. Mac people, don't worry, you don't have HDR. So if you're thinking about getting an HDR monitor for your PC, here's Uncle Nate's advice. Mm-hmm. Don't do it. Stay away. Run. If you really, really insist on getting an HDR monitor for your PC, get a TV and mount it to the wall. I have been having nothing but trouble with HDR the last 2 weeks. Screw HDR for Windows. Now HDR for games, for TVs, wonderful. Mm-hmm. 2 thumbs up. But for Windows PC?
What's giving you so much headache?
Well, I love HDR, but HDR doesn't love me back. See, on Windows, it's just so confusing. It's not quite. Now they have been making upgrades for there, but it is so hard to do anything. It's almost impossible to watch Netflix. It's almost impossible to get games to play. It's just so convoluted. Whereas on video game consoles like the Xbox One, or should I say the Xbox One S or X, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 4 Pro, Apple TV, some Amazon TVs, plug and play, boom, works fine, no problem. Right. Windows PC, you'd think it would be easier. You'd think they would do a good job. You'd be wrong. And again, I say this to all the Apple fans, of which I know you come from a interoperational system household, so you understand where I'm coming from. Don't worry, Apple people, you don't have HDR on your Mac, so don't worry. But so confusing, so get it together.
Okay, no, that's
there's your PSA.
Yeah, that's a bit of a different take than we've heard from others. But you're right. The only time I have heard about HDR have been for video games and movies and Blu-ray and blah blah blah. Not a lot about HDR in everyday life. But I guess you just went through a computer build, and I'm sure as people continue to upgrade their technology over the next couple of years, they will run into, I guess.
It's getting better. It's getting better, right? Mm-hmm. But it's getting better the same way like Cuba's getting better. Like it's.
I'm not too familiar with Cuba, so forgive me.
It's like North Korea is getting better. There's been some upward mobility towards cohesion, but still as a relative fact, it remains nonplussed.
I
So,
gotcha.
but yeah, so HDR on Windows, do a better job.
All right, no, fair enough. All right, so but you did not come on to rip HDR a new one, but rather you came
I
on with
can,
you can,
but I don't. I
but
don't want to do that.
but you also came on to talk about a number of topics. But before we even do that, why don't you go ahead because I don't feel like I gave Popzara a good shake. Why don't you explain Popzara and what it is you guys do there, and a little bit of background on
Oh,
your
sure.
site?
So for $10 a month, you too can be a success. No, no, I'm just kidding. It's $20 a month. But for the 1 month, for the one yearly rate, no, we're a little bit of everything, as you said. For some reason, the Computer America family insists on calling us a magazine, which I never correct you guys because I love that designation. I wish it would catch on. Why can't you have a digital magazine? But in reality, we are a pop culture slash entertainment slash thought provoking website with a lovable green dinosaur. And
There
what
you
that
go.
really means is that, well, to be honest, Ben, I mean, you've appeared on the site before. You understand where I'm taking this. It's mostly a collective of people who are just sort of getting their start or trying to make a difference in there. And at the end of the day, there's no paywall. So what do you have to lose?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a great collection from, I guess, people that you may not have heard of before, or even if you have, then you guys do a very good job of course, putting up a lot of different. Actually, I take that back. I have never seen a book review on your site before, but here it is, Blair.
What?
I have no.
Only for 5 years. We've had that complaint.
Yeah.
It's sometimes the book reviews can get sort of muddled in the mix, but no, it's something we're working towards. But no, actually, I'm very proud of the book reviews, simply because you don't see a lot of sites that deal with video games and movies and tech have book reviews.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very proud of that.
Right. No, and of course, yep. So everything in between, and of course that gives you a very unique, I guess, perspective to come on the show here. A lot of our correspondents come on, and they deal primarily in cybersecurity or consumer electronics, and you are a bit of everything, which is fun.
Russian hacking. No, I will say this. I'll say this in a little clouded, gilded way. Given the state of the way the news has been lately in this country, I'm very proud of the fact that Popzara usually steers pretty clear of that. And
Right.
so, if nothing else, there's a little break from the constant. I'll say that.
There you go. And with that being said, a lot of different topics that you have, of course, sent over. We have a couple of our own that we're going to throw in there. Hopefully, I didn't accidentally delete them. But even if I did, you can find them over in the show notes, which I'm going to go run and get. But if memory serves correctly, you picked a topic that I wanted to talk about. I had it all lined up. I bookmarked it, but I did not get a chance to bring it up on the program. And that has to do with moon people. That has to do with Japanese moon people. And why anyone would want to go back to that giant dust ball in the sky.
Well, I think we can all applaud. You're a big fan of SpaceX, and I think we're going to get into a little bit of that later. But you're a big fan of space. You're a big fan of
Right.
rockets, and I know we've talked on this show before about how what a monumental human achievement it is to not just send a rocket up, but to land a rocket back. And you
Right.
don't really see that a lot, right? So whenever you hear about Japan in the news lately, it's usually have something to do with sociology. So it's very nice to see Japan sort of make their stake in, I guess I don't know, what's the technical term? Cosmetology?
Uh,
Cosmetology? Like, one is makeup and one is rockets. Do not get the two confused.
Cosmetology, I think, is the study of makeup, and then there's like astronomy and yeah, that kind of thing. But yeah,
Well, have you heard about the real news story? I just sort of took a guess that you may have talked about it, about Japan's, when they landed on the asteroid Ryuga? Ryugu?
yeah, they sent I was going to say they sent a drone because everything is drone nowadays. But yeah, they essentially landed a craft on an asteroid speeding by. That was incredible.
You know what's funny? I don't understand why. I've always felt this way, and I don't want to put on my tinfoil hat, but I got to tell you something. I'm not one of those people that thinks that the United States faked the moon landing just to get some sort of, political or sociological edge over the Russians.
Right.
But why is it that almost the entirety of space exploration stopped in the 70s? Like, can you imagine? Like, that's like the Amish equivalent of technology. It's like, you know what? We went to the moon. We played golf. We're done. We don't need to. The course isn't going to change. Donald Trump hasn't put a golf course up there. So my question is, why haven't we gone back? In 40-something years, why haven't we gone back? It's absurd to me. It's absolutely absurd. James Cameron can't keep his paws off the ocean. He just has to go back under the ocean, but we don't go back to the moon. And that's incredible to me. That's absolutely insane. And the technology from the 1960s when they went to the moon has certainly got better. We hear all the time about Moore's law, multiplied by 1,000, where the computing power they had at the time in NASA could fit into a pocket calculator or one of those annoying singing birthday cards.
Right.
You have iPhones that can computate better than anything they could possibly dream of back then, and we haven't gone back. So we need to go back. And if it's going to be the Japanese, of course it is, because let me say something that's a little racist. I love the Japanese. I speak a little Japanese. I love it. But I'll tell you this. The Japanese as a society, as a civilization, have a very well-earned stereotype about them. They take what other countries and cultures have done and they perfect them. China made paper. They made paper houses. England made tea. They made a 15-hour tea ceremony. So if they can go to the moon and colonize it and put sex robots, then the world peace is going to happen.
I don't think that'll be the first occupant of the moon. Otherwise, the moon turns into a very different kind of amusement park from Futurama. But
have you not seen Futurama? That's the future. That's what happens.
Right. No one wants to go to the moon except for the tacky amusement park. And and trust me, I'm right there with you. There are many others out there who want to, of course, go to the moon for one reason or another. You mentioned SpaceX. NASA says that they have plans.
You know what, though? Can I segue real quick? Sure. Real quick, just for fun. If the Japanese take over, okay, first of all, that does three things. The first thing, it gives the Japanese a little bit of nationalistic spirit. The Japanese have been in the lulls, not the LOLZ lulls, but the LULZ. As a society, they're graying. There's reports coming out about virginity is rampant. First of all, how can virginity be rampant? In Japan, it is. We're talking about a society that's not producing babies anymore, that has no real cultural cachet the way they did in the 80s. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but if you go back and watch any movie from the 1980s, Japan was the threat. Now it's China, but it was Japan back then. They were buying everything. Giving them something to fight for, giving them a goal to be competitive with China, in the space race, or America, or even Russia, would be a boon to their economy. It would be wonderful. And also, most of all, if Japan does it, that means that Elon Musk and SpaceX will have some competition, and anything that gets Elon Musk out of the space race is good for me, because he's a clown, and I think he does a lot of damage to it.
He's talking about anything that gets him away from his Twitter account would be a boon to everything.
That's true, and I know you know where I'm going with this, but there's plans. Do you remember that they just announced last week that Musk was going to fund a Japanese billionaire? Of course, speaking of Japan,
the billionaire was going to fund the billionaire, but
the billionaire. Okay, I apologize. That came out wrong. But of course, it was Japanese. So there's something to be said about this, right? There's something going on in Japan. So if the Japanese can do it, if the country can do it as a whole, I'm all for that. I think that's fantastic. If the Koreas can shake hands, Japan can go to the moon. So it's fantastic.
Of course, the main thing that I'm looking to Japan for is the 2020 Olympics. I think those things are going to be insane, and I hope a good insane.
It sells itself.
Yeah, it really does. But I mean, this idea that let's see, they want to plan 2 missions, and they announced it through iSpace Wednesday, Falcon 9. Looks like they're going to try to either compete or use SpaceX to get there. I mean, You mentioned a little bit earlier, why have we not been back? Why? And it seems like for 30, 40 years, we've been talking about our next planned mission to the moon, and it always just gets bumped. It always becomes just not a priority for whatever administration or organization to get to the moon. So I hope with more, I guess, different organizations, be it Japan, be it SpaceX, be it NASA, be it the Russians, Chinese, I hope with more organizations looking to go to the moon, it won't get bumped one more time.
There is a theory, though, is that a lot of people point to the Challenger disaster of 1986. Now, full disclosure, I'm tacitly connected to Krista McCullough, the teacher who
Right.
lost her life in the Challenger. And if you're ever in the state of New Hampshire, she's considered a hero. But you have the combination of two different things. One, you have this. Let's just say you have the stoppage of America's economic rival. You have the Soviet Union, let's just say discombobulating into nothing. So we don't really have another economic superpower to battle against. Now, again, I mentioned China. Now, China certainly is positioned to be that as an economic competitor, but as a technological patent competitor, we haven't really seen that from China yet, which I've been very disappointed. Now, for those of you who wonder why should we go back to the moon, other than very very linear golf courses, the fact of the matter is, it's not so much the moon that's the goal; it's the production of intellectual data, inventiveness, and innovation that comes from the endeavor itself is transformational. And one could make the argument that we would eventually have telecommunications with GPS satellites, the internet, and of course, the number one invention of all time, Tang, from exploring space. So all these are sort of byproducts of the space race, and we've been coasting on that for 40, 50 years. It would be wonderful to see what would happen next, if it's possible.
Yeah, there have been some. I guess as far as technology goes, there have been some rumors that love 'em or hate 'em, Facebook, and I think also Elon Musk with one of his other ventures, they want to make a global internet grid so that anywhere you go on Earth, thanks to satellites, you would have internet connectivity to watch that cat video and be delivered that Facebook ad.
Yes.
To your phone. And I think something like that, and of course I, put a little bit of a playful spin on it where, it's just for Facebook, but no, the idea that no matter where you go on this planet, you would have a connection to others. And, not that you have to, but in case of emergencies or whatever, it's just the idea that we have the capability. We just need the push to kind of get it there. And I think a space race does exactly that. It gives you the push.
You're exactly right about competition. I'm going to just add something that kind of hurts me to say, but it's true. That if you go back and look at the great innovators throughout cultural epochs, you have the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Hertz, all this. These are people who were typically born poor, who amassed fortunes. It became ludicrously rich. Now, I know in some spheres we're supposed to hate the rich, but here's the thing: when you have the early part of the 20th century, what did these people do when they had too much money? They gave it away. They gave it away with infrastructure building. They built colleges, they built roads, they built universities, they built libraries, they built research grants. They basically built the foundation that became the intellectual innovators of the 21st century. And if Facebook and Google and
Amazon?
I can't say it without joking. If Tesla and that person, Amazon. Now I don't know about Bezos. I haven't really seen him be an entrepreneurial.
He has. Bezos has a pretty big investment in Blue Rocket or something.
Well, Bezos likes to make money. See, he's not Bezos is an outlier because Bezos is the only person in this group that's not a engineer, not a legitimate engineer. He's a venture capitalist.
Blue Origin, by the way, right?
But you know what I'm saying? That he's not a Musk. Like, for all Musk's fault, he's a thinker. Same with Zuckerberg. Same with the Google people. So in that respect, I think you see this sort of play out with Amazon themselves. Amazon doesn't innovate anything, but they become very, very good at investing in what they think is going to be successful. And in some ways, they've taken the place of Apple in the tech world. In fact, in many, many ways.
Right.
And so I would say the moment I see Jeff Bezos invest in space race, the moment I think it's going to be successful. So
I mean, again, they do have an investment in Blue Origin. It's just, Blue Origin is, like you said, in the business of making money, and the only thing they do is to take up satellites. Like, that's all they do. And hopefully, and they kind of do it on the cheap. So
one last thing about Japan and space, though. I don't have the story on me, but I remember just a few weeks ago I was reading about how Japan is going to test a space elevator, right? And Are you familiar with how space elevators may or may not work?
I'm very familiar.
Yeah.
They're like essentially either a cable or some kind of pseudo elevator, usually for freight, cargo, and things like that. And you have a counterweight orbiting, geostationary, and you're able to, instead of with rockets, or maybe you do use rockets, much more effectively kind of lift things off of the Earth instead of throwing them off the Earth with rockets. It makes getting things into space much, much more affordable.
All I know is that we're talking about this stuff legitimately, and we're talking about it because, like you said, these Silicon Valley companies. Who was the guy from Microsoft who funded all that deep sea exploration? Was it Pete? What's his name? You know who I'm talking about, right?
I'm gonna look it up.
Goodness, a lot of the Microsoft people have been very good at reinvesting their money in the culture, and I'll give them credit for this. And so this is the spirit of capitalism, and I'm not ashamed of it. I think this is fantastic. I want to go to Mars, and I want to meet the aliens, and I won't be happy until I meet the aliens.
This was a story that we did pick up on, and you mentioned it a little while ago, where a billionaire has purchased the first, not even the first seat, but all of the seats on the first, essentially, consumer.
All of the seats. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Selfish, man. Selfish.
Well, no, and he said he was going to give them away to artists. He says that that's what we need. And this is the same guy who spent like $300 million on a single painting. He really, really, really values the arts, and he has the money to back it up. So he says that he wants to take I think somewhere between 8 and 10 artists, and he's taking applications to launch in 2023. And I thought that was pretty interesting, because and just real quick, I mean, just all of the astronauts that came back, their mission in their life, of course, after talking about what it was like to stand on the moon and, orbit the moon and look at the Earth, all of them came back with that profound realization that, the Earth is small, we have to take care of it, we are very interconnected, we think that, everyone is a separate people, but when you see the entirety of the Earth, and you can block it with your hand, you realize, we're in this together. And I think it's very, very cool that the first billionaire is like, we're going to need architects, artists, musicians. I think he said dancers as well. Why not? Novelists,
of course,
poets, all of them. He wants to take the best of the best and have that same realization and hopefully share it with others through their art medium. So
I will say this. I'm going to leave this story thread with this little anecdote. If anybody's interested, I strongly recommend you either seek out the book or you seek out the movie, The Right Stuff, both written by Thomas Wolfe, who passed away this year. And the book is utterly, utterly engrossing. It's one of the greatest books ever written in the 20th century. I kid you not, I'm not joking. He goes off on a tangent where he starts telling the story from the perspective of the chimpanzee. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot to go into space. And imagine being the first pioneers to go into space, knowing that the probability of you becoming incinerated is extremely high. And the fact that you and I are having this conversation now about eccentric billionaires going into space because they could afford it is incredible to me. Like, that's how mundane the idea of space innovation has become. And so I want to see what happens. And I'll just say this. If we can get the Kardashians on that flight, let's do it. Let's do a campaign for this.
I don't know what fundamentally would change about the Kardashians in space, other than the title "Kardashians in Space."
That means for one brief shining moment, I will exist on Earth without the Kardashians, and that is worth it.
Yeah, but they'll be lording it over you in space. So
let them lord over in space. I don't want to share Earth with them just for a couple hours, please.
All right, but let's go ahead, switch over from that, and before we get into the next topic that you have picked out here, I just found the story published, I think, like 30 minutes ago, so piping hot. And sure. I wanted your reaction. This coming from a publication called NeoWin, and they said that Apple. You've heard of them? They make the iPhone.
Yes.
Yeah.
NeoWin is okay, by the way. What's the story?
Apple demands a hefty $9 billion from Google to make Google the default search engine for iOS?
Not surprising. If you go back and read the book Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, there's a lot of information there that was not known. Okay, the book's been out for 7 years, so it's not new.
Right.
But there's an entire chapter about Apple dealing with Google about making Google the default search engine on the original iOS. Well, whatever, it was just when it was a mobile operating system, and about how important it was. And there's a very, very famous anecdote from that particular story where Jobs would call the app developers while he was at a religious service and demand the font be changed and the color be changed and all of this. And it's extreme, right? But it just goes to show you what it was. Yeah, it's been a contentious back and forth, and it's not just Apple. I mean, what you're talking about now, I believe it, but I believe it's the latest volley where it's gone back and forth between Google and Bing and DuckDuckGo and all of this stuff. And remember, when let's not leave out the middle child, which is Mozilla, which is Firefox, a company that only exists because Google was their default search engine for a very long time.
Right.
And so, yeah, so the fact of the matter is, it doesn't really matter what your default is, you can change it.
Yeah, and of course the article outlines that as well, saying that Apple is one of the biggest channels of traffic acquisition for Google, and despite the high cost, it's quite likely Google will agree to pay the sum. But I'm kind of getting to the point where Google is a definition. Google is to look something up, and I think when you have that kind of name recognition in people's heads, even if and hey, you can even ask Microsoft, even if Google wasn't the default, if there was a way to set it to the default, then I feel like people would do that automatically, because I don't see Apple turning to Bing for results. Maybe DuckDuckGo, but even that is very anti, kind of data collection, which Apple is very for. I mean, I don't in the next couple of years, I would not be surprised if Google says, stuff it, use us or don't, but we're not paying you another dime.
There's some evidence, and I don't have any that I can point to, that Google actually makes much more money on iOS than they do in their own operating system, and because the iOS is basically a completely different continent from the rest of the mobile world. I mean, we don't really talk about this anymore, but you remember the good old days, like 2 or 3 years ago, when we talked about how, every story was iOS versus Android, Android, blah, blah. We don't do this anymore because it's sort of settled science that iOS won the battle. iOS does not have the market share of Android, not even close. But the market share it does have is so productive when it comes to finance. It's sort of like America. America may only have 4% of the world's population, but we produce like 70% we consume like 70% of its resources. That's what iOS is. And because of the way Android is structured, because of the patent sharing of who owns it, with iOS, basically Apple is serving Google ready-made customers. Like, here you go, consume. And they may not have access to the Google Play Store and everything, but do you have an iPhone?
I do.
Many times, you know what I'm saying, the Google versions of apps are better than Apple's versions.
Yeah.
At least because they're more flexible. And so you might have the Gmail app, you may have the Google Maps app, which you probably do. These are better versions. And if you have this family of apps on your iPhone, they interplay with each other in a way that even Apple's apps can't do. Like, Gmail will open up in Chrome browser versus Google Maps. And it's extremely solid. And if you upgrade on your iPhone, you'll get an email reminder. So Google's extremely good about keeping you in the Google family. And I don't necessarily have a problem with this. I don't. But again, I don't know how this is going to play out, because as much as we'd like to see a competitor to Google, Bing ain't it.
Yeah.
Bing's nice, but it's not a real competitor. So
Bing isn't that, and I don't think Apple, they're working on it, but I don't feel like they have all the services in place. Because, like, if you told me right now that I had to use Apple for all my emailing, I would say how. I wouldn't even know how to begin to replace half the services.
Are you talking about, when you say email now, are you talking about iCloud email, or are you talking about clients?
I'm talking about, like, if I needed to drop Gmail entirely and only use Apple, I guess I could set up, kind of an Apple iCloud email address, but I would really prefer not to. But I will say that there is music playing in the background, everyone, we're talking to Nathan Evans, Popzara Magazine, and we are talking real quick about Apple, and then we're going to switch over to Windows. So, everyone, stay tuned. More Computer America. Happy Friday, everyone. Be right back.
Greece is cheap.
But the airfare costs a fortune.
Paris?
Not much closer, and again, airfare...
What about Puerto Vallarta?
Let's face it, flying anywhere is just too expensive.
Wait, what's this? Low-cost airlines.
With one call to low-cost airlines, you'll drastically slash your travel costs. We're talking insanely low airline prices to any of your favorite destinations. Where would you like to go? London, Rome, Costa Rica, Australia?
Wow, that's cheap.
So why wait? Call now to learn how crazy cheap it is to fly anywhere in the U.S. or international. Our prices are so low, we can't publish them. The only way to get them is to call to instantly hear the most amazing best deals on airline travel. It's that easy. So call now and start packing.
800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. That's 800-215-4461.
We are all Brother Wolf. 10 years ago, a group of locals banded together to create positive change. We took animals into our homes, held adoption events at local retailers, and talked to the community about our mission to help build a no-kill Asheville. A decade later, we have achieved so many victories for animals in need. There's been so much progress, yet there's still so much to do. As part of our year-long celebration, we encourage you to become a member of our special Compassionate Circle program. With a monthly donation of $10 or more, you will have behind-the-scenes access to the work we are doing at Brother Wolf. Our goal is to reach 1,000 members because we receive no government funding. Working together, we can help build and sustain no-kill communities. Learn more at compassionatecircle.bwar.org. We are a 501c3 tax-deductible organization.
And welcome back to the Computer America Show. It is 32 minutes past the hour, and we continue on with Nathan Evans, Popzara Magazine, and we were just going to wrap up this idea that Apple is about to fork over. I'm sorry, the other way around. Google is going to fork over $9 billion to Apple so that they continue to be the prime search engine for Apple. And really, Nathan, and as you were, kind of saying before the break, Google earns a lot from this deal. Like, Google earns a lot from being the first thing they see when they open up any kind of iOS app and, using Google products within the iOS atmosphere. That's a very lucrative thing. So $9 billion seems like a lot, but Mm-hmm.
In the world, you have to sideload it, and that leaves users vulnerable to all sorts of nastiness. And so I would assume that this deal is a extension of Google's advertising and data collection. And for example, Siri, which has gotten a lot better. By the way, I just want to say iOS 12 is really, really good. It feels a lot more complete than iOS 11. It's not a full review by any stretch, but Apple did a very good job. It's a very boring operating system, but it's nuanced in a way that iOS 11 wasn't, so thumbs up. But I'm really surprised at how much of the inter-app operability is in iOS 12 that wasn't there before. And Apple has really started opening up their operating system to third parties in a way that I'm really surprised about. But so I would imagine that this deal has a lot of that, a lot of data suction going on. Right. Or at least, nuanced data suction. But to answer your question before the break, if you had to give up Google, you can. But is this hypothetical?
It's hypothetical.
In a world is of course. But is this hypothetical in a world where Outlook exists, for example?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, I was thinking more, if Apple were to kind of quote unquote wage war against Google, and Apple made every Google user choose between investing into the iOS atmosphere or the Android Google atmosphere. How would that kind of go down? And I guess you throwing Microsoft into the mix, a little more complicated, but yeah.
Outlook is a very good Gmail replacement, and the only disadvantage I would say to Outlook, and now full disclosure, I am an Outlook 365 subscriber for business email. For Popzara, we had to choose. We actually had this choice, Ben. We had to choose between Office 365 and Google Apps for Business, and despite the fact that I pretty much run my life on Google, we chose Microsoft, and we chose them because they offer a more robust product for email, and a lot of that trickles down to the free version of Outlook. Outlook is a very, very competent a mail substitute. Unfortunately, it's anything above that where we have some difficulties. Like, they don't have the shared documents quite as smooth as Google or anything else. Google is the whole package. But remember, if you're using their services, it's not free. You are basically giving them privy to every little thing that you do. Just from but I think people know that by now.
Yeah,
or they should. They should.
Well, and when I first went to Google, Gmail was a very good Outlook replacement. So I guess we've come full circle. But hey, this is just a story, came out just a couple minutes ago, and wanted to squeeze that one in there. Sure. But hey, since we are lightly touching onto Microsoft and Windows, you have a couple stories here. And we can go ahead and talk about the operating system. So Windows 10, obviously, I think a lot of people right out of the gate, like the first year it was available, if you had any version of Windows 7 or 8 or 8.1, they allowed you to, and maybe even XP, but they allowed you to upgrade to Windows 10 for free. And I think after a year and after that promotion wore off, everyone kind of claimed that Windows 10 was the winner, but hard numbers stopped coming out. We got some initial numbers saying that so many devices that had, kind of installed Windows 10, but we never had any more hard numbers for quite a while.
Sure.
But you had this, and hey, actually from NeoWin, who knew? But
go figure.
Yeah, there's and you found this article here talking about the fact that Microsoft has just confirmed 700 million devices run Windows 10. That's incredible.
Now, we have to take this story with a grain of salt. I fully believe that there's, hundreds of millions of systems. I'm probably 3 million of those users. But I will say this. By the way, just to answer your question, it was limited down to Windows 7 for the free upgrade.
Yeah.
And not only that, it was actually Microsoft was allowing people with bootleg Windows 7s to grab a legitimate copy to join the family. That's how desperate they were. And I will say this. Couple things. The definition of Windows 10 is very flexible. A lot of systems are basically Windows 10 machines. Microsoft offers a free Windows 10 program to OEM developers who make devices that are less than 10 inches. They have Windows 10, Windows 10S, which is their free version that's available on devices like the Surface Go. By the way, if you have a Surface Go, disable the Windows S and get the real thing. It's a lot better, and it can handle it. In fact, if you have Windows S, just get the real thing. You also have Windows 10 phones. You also have Windows 10. Technically, Xbox One is considered Windows 10. You have Windows 10 this, Windows 10 this. Now, 700 million may seem like less than you'd expect from the operating system, but here's the caveat. Microsoft did a very interesting thing with Windows 10 that I think helps them out overall, but makes them look less impressive. For the first time, Windows 10 is tied to specific hardware. For example, in the old days, if you had a license for Windows 8 or Windows XP, you could put it on any machine that could have it. You've probably done this.
Right.
With Windows 10, it's a lot more difficult to do this. And, as we talked about before, I have a new build. I had a legitimate copy of Windows 10. My legitimate copy of Windows 10, Ben, was ancient. Its ancestor began life as Windows 8. And so, which they don't make available anymore. I want to give this another PSA to all your listeners. if you want, Windows 10 is outstanding. Windows 10 is the best computer operating system on the market, bar none. It convinced me to go back from Apple. It's got its problems. It's got its quirks. It does not play good with HDR, but generally speaking, it's a solid operating system. It gets the job done. It can do anything. It does everything. And if it doesn't do it, then you don't need it because it does it. But I'll say this. Let's say you get a new PC build. You want to go from Intel to AMD like I did, or vice versa, or you upgrade a motherboard. It's not going to let you activate your Windows.
Right.
So here's how you get around it. This is totally legit. Call Microsoft, complain loudly, and they'll give you a new product key.
Yeah.
They want you to have Windows 10. They're not going to not have you have it by spending $200 to get a new license. They'll give you a new product key. So
I've been in that position before, and really it can even pop up if you do something as simple as, and I say simple, but if you do something as simple as replace a motherboard or a hard drive, like a really crucial part of your hardware. And sometimes Windows will come back and say, we don't recognize the system. Please repurchase a new key. And yeah, and hey, just calling them up, customer support, that's certainly something that they do. And in a lot of cases, and you know this as well as anyone, Microsoft really doesn't make that much money from you and me. They make money from organizations that have 50,000 computers.
Exactly. Yeah, there was even some talk on this show years ago that you and I actually predicted that they would make Windows 10 free, and they did for a while. Remember that? So we thought we were prescient. But I will say this: if you're going to call and complain, I want you to understand. I talked a second ago about Outlook and how it's not really robust. Outlook does have one advantage, though, that with Windows, like iOS and Android, you have to sign into your account, right?
Right.
And so that actually, when you sign in using your Windows account, your Microsoft account, which is probably the same account you use for Xbox Live, for Skype, for everything, it does keep an imprint that you have a legitimate copy of Windows. And so that makes it a lot easier. I mean, honestly, Ben, Microsoft is tiptoeing ever further closer to how Apple does it, that your product key is now listed under your online account as opposed to, some hexadecimal string of letters. So they're getting a little closer, they're getting a little better, but at the end of the day, if you complain, they'll give it to you. So just keep that in mind if you're going to upgrade.
Yep. And as always, be polite.
Of course.
Yeah, the person on the other end is going to help you. Just be polite. So
exactly.
So there's that one, 700 million devices, and I remember, they reached some of their previous milestones very, very quickly. Let's see, as the article here saying that 10 months ago they were at 600 million devices, so 100 million in about a year. I don't think that, and this happened a little while ago. Microsoft had certain milestones that they were hoping to hit in a certain time frame, and they stopped hitting them, so they stopped reporting them.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I guess there's still, yeah.
Well, it's funny, not to interrupt, I'm sorry, but you remember how, going back to the space race, we talked about how in the 1980s the Soviet Union went kaput, literally? I mean, the civilization, the nations that built Sputnik went kaput, literally. Here's the sad fact: is there's just not a lot of Windows users anymore like there used to be. The home PC is not a dying market, but it's a receding market, and a lot of people are not upgrading their computers, or they're not getting new computers. They're getting iPhones or or iPads, or heaven forbid Chromebooks. Or even Macs. So I mean.
And that kind of segues into something that I made when we were discussing here on the program, the iPhone 10s, whatever, Max, and the idea that a phone fully decked out is going to cost you now $1,400. Like when Samsung first crossed
ridiculous, isn't it?
Well, maybe, and it's like Samsung crossed that $1,000 threshold that everyone was afraid to cross, and now the floodgates are open. But like I think about a phone that's you can go buy a $20 phone from Walmart and call it a day, but a $1,400 phone, and it's like, we're asking more of our phones every single day. Like, if you look in terms of how much time people spend on their phones, as opposed to certain, like, in my mind, that's always how you should think about, how do I spend any kind of mad money, or how do I spend money to improve my life? It's like, for me, I spend hours of my day sitting in front of my computer. So, buying a $300 DX Racer, admittedly, probably not a good investment. DX Racer, they don't pay me, so I can say this. It's a pretty good chair. It's not the best I've ever had, but it's okay. But I was still like, instead of going out and spending $70 at Office Depot for a chair, instead investing $300 into, honestly, what I feel like is a $300 chair, I was happy with that investment. And I think phones are about the same way. We spend so much time, ask so much of them, and we use them so often. Like, $1,400 sounds ridiculous, but I mean, that's a good place to put your money because people are using them, I think, $1,400 worth.
You're exactly right. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I'll laugh at somebody spending $1,500 on a phone, but that person spends a lot of time with that particular phone and does things that I wouldn't do. And so if you're going to have something and you have the money for it, why not get the best? In the 1960s and 70s, there was when coffee makers were a new thing, eventually espresso makers came out, and espresso makers became all the rage. They became all the rage. And so if you had an espresso maker, you were really living with it, man. You were digging it. You were grooving. And I don't know if you ever saw that. There's a James Bond movie where an espresso maker factors in the story. It's really silly. But the fact of this is, at the end of the day, I can only quote Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs, when people asked him about iPads, he would say, look, if people want them, they'll buy them. And if they don't, they won't. And to me, I know that sounds simple, but when we poo-poo the $1,500 iPhone, we can't. Like, the iPhone X is the best-selling iPhone of all time by a large margin, and it was the most expensive.
Right.
And so people will buy what they want. The market will decide what is acceptable for these things. And again, you have Google trying their hand at making premium phones, and they've been failures at it. The Pixel phones have been failures. Every attempt has been failures. The only competitor in the high-end market, the only one, has been Samsung. That's it. Nobody else. And you see this a lot with Chromebooks as well with Google. You see them making $1,000 Chromebooks. Nobody wants those. It defeats the purpose, really. But so if somebody wants to spend $15 on an iPhone XS or whatever it's called,
right,
then Apple's going to make a lot of money. And at some point, maybe they're going to spend $5,000 and they won't work, or they're going to offer $5,000. But for now, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, it's as a tech reviewer, it's not so much laughing at people who spend that kind of money on a phone, but it's about as long as the technology is there to justify it. And so far, in a lot of cases, I think Apple is delivering a quality product. It's just they're overshooting what I think the capabilities of a phone were before. So,
well, can I say one last thing about it?
One last thing.
I don't consider the iPhone technology in the way that I would have 5 years ago. Yes, it's technology, but it's technology the way a refrigerator is technology now. It's in the old days, if you wanted a refrigerator, you had to have somebody come over and deliver the ice cube, and they call it an ice box, and you had to you had to clean out the tray, and you had to maintenance it. But now you just plug the thing in, and boom, you can keep your Hot Pockets nice and cold. And so that's what the iPhone is. The iPhone is an appliance more than it is a piece of technology. It is the perfected piece of technology that we've been hearing about forever. It is no hassle, no fuss. If you screw it up, if you drop it in the toilet, you bring it in and get it maintenance the way you would a washing machine. You don't program it, you don't crack it, you don't.
True.
And now they're moving away from SIM cards, by the way. They're moving to eSIMs. It is an appliance. It is not meant for you to go and do anything. It is meant for you to use and to be an interactive passive user. And that is why it's so popular. And that is something I think a lot of Android people do not understand it. Like, I don't like it. I can't do this. That's exactly why they like it, because they don't have to. When's the last time you drove a manual car?
Wow.
Or standard.
Yeah,
seriously.
Almost a decade ago.
Now, enthusiasts love it.
Oh, sure.
But the non-enthusiasts, by definition, outnumber the enthusiasts. And that's what the iPhone is. The iPhone, I'm not trying to say it's not fantastic, it's not powerful. That's the phone I'd give my grandmother if she was still alive. But I will say this, that it's an appliance. It's hard for me to call it technology in a traditional sense anymore.
Right.
But at the same point, that's why I think it works. That's why I think it sells so well.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so obviously segue. Let's go ahead. Microsoft confirms Windows 10 on 700 million devices. Good for them. Hopefully, Windows 11 isn't goes a little bit faster. But so far, nothing about Windows 11. We're still on Windows 10, and
I'm happy with Windows 10, aren't you? I mean, Windows 10 is pretty good.
I'm decently happy. There's a couple things that are going on with
It's a privacy nightmare, but
with Cortana, with some of the notifications, the fact that they're installing programs on my operating system without asking me, hoping that I'll play their stupid game demo, which I will never do.
I was gonna say another PSA for you too, Ben. When you get a new Windows 10 build or whatever, go open up your applications folder and right-click and uninstall all that crap.
Yeah.
Get rid of it. Get rid of it all. It's like 3 gigs. Gone.
And it's like the problem is that traditionally we call that bloatware. You buy some of the more affordable laptops out there on the market. They came with software that helped the company subsidize the manufacturing and the distribution of their technology, and in turn for paying $20 less than the competitor, you now have a copy of some weird, not password manager, but like let's say email service client, and
usually some trial software, by the way.
Yeah, all trials trying to get you to pay, obviously, and yeah, it's called bloatware. You uninstall it, you move on with your life. The problem is that Windows 10 is starting to inject bloatware after installation. Like I've had my Windows 10 system for 2 years now, and yeah, they're still trying to install things without my permission. There are some things I don't like, but that's more of a business complaint than an operating system complaint. So, hey, you're right. It is definitely a good one. Now, this next one, I think we can wrap this up in like 2 or 3 minutes. Microsoft will end support for classic Skype.
I told you. I've been telling you this for years. And you remember we went over this. Full disclosure, let me embarrass Ben. About 2 years ago, we had this thing where Ben couldn't get Skype installed on his computer because the Windows version of Skype was dominant. You remember this?
Yeah.
That's a private hell. And they've made it a little bit easier, but they have essentially discontinued already. If you have Windows 10, if you try to download Skype, if you try to download the client of Skype and not use the inferior Windows 10 app, it will negate it. It'll try to get you to the thing. You can do some hacking to try to get it working using compatibility mode, which is what I do. But Skype's still going to look like candy. It looks like a bag of candy.
Right.
And that is going to be the default Skype very, very soon. And my hope is that Microsoft will continue to support it, because I know you and I use this to do your show. I know I use it to do podcasts with Popzara. People say use Discord. I'm not going to use Discord for that sort of thing. Sorry, I'm not a child. I'm not a teenager. But Skype is still the best for all its problems and for all its faults. It's still the best, and it's the best, Ben, despite all the finger pulling that Microsoft has done to it. Microsoft has done everything they can do to destroy Skype, and it still survives.
Right. Yeah. That's something that Microsoft seems very adept at. When they purchased, let's say they purchased Skype, they purchased, I think, maybe LinkedIn. Was that Microsoft?
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah. They did. They turned that into a spam machine.
Yeah. So like Microsoft's very good at finding successful products and reaping all the benefits, and then trying to strangle them slowly in the corner without anyone noticing.
We call it pillaging, by the way, sometimes.
All right. So they're pillaging. We're not going to say the other word that is generally associated with pillaging, but I will say that
it rhymes with make.
Right.
So
exactly. So I do like Skype. There are alternatives. Just yesterday we were talking to our Linux correspondent, and I think next, I know Linux, but I think that next month when we have him on, we're going to talk about alternatives to Skype, because we do the Skype, we do the show using Skype, but there are alternatives that work, platform agnostic, that are very, very good. So.
You know what's funny? When I first met you guys, you were using an alternative. You were using Google Hangouts, and that was the ubiquitous platform that Google had set up, and it seemed like a pretty decent deal.
And then they killed it.
And then they killed it, and they killed it because they don't concentrate on anything. And for all its faults, Microsoft is stuck with Skype, and it's become a very mature program. And my advice, because I know you have people in the industry who listen to this program, is that if you're going to gain people's confidence, don't rock the boat. Be consistent. Consistent and boring is like catnip to a business.
Right.
They don't want innovation. They want nice and stolid. They want no innovation. They want dinosaur speed. That's what they want because they don't want things to screw up.
And also,
You know,
they don't want any loss of productivity. And if you are having to train an entire workforce on, the changes that came out every 3 months, that's a waste of time. So
exactly, like
you're
the
right.
one thing a business does not want to hear is, "Wow, this is so cool," because that's distracting. I don't want distracting. I want boring. It's
Right.
work.
Right.
If you
So,
want fun, do it on your own time.
yep. So there's Skype. We still use Skype here on the show, but there are alternatives. One of them being Zoom. I think we're gonna look into. Hey, that's a conversation for when Skype finally does job support entirely. But
We'll see, though. I mean, it could be a good change. They could dedicate resources and make the web version better. I mean, to be fair to Microsoft, they have a Windows app version of iTunes now, which is better than the desktop client that Apple makes because it's consistent. I don't know if you use iTunes. Anybody who uses iTunes on Windows, you know what I'm going to say. Usually there's some conflicts when it comes to certain AM frameworks because, Windows 10 doesn't have all the legacy frameworks of Windows 30, Windows 8 and Windows 7. And Apple is lazy when it comes to support. So if you have iTunes and you have Windows 10, just go to the Windows Store. It's a very good version that I'll recommend. So if they could do that with Skype, then maybe the future is not entirely horrible.
right. So, all right, there's that one. Let's go ahead and talk about. All right, this is going to take us through the last 3-4 minutes of the show. Probably not enough time, but if you could explain the situation, because I only have like a cursory knowledge of a tweet was sent out by Elon Musk. The SEC picked it up, and over a tweet that essentially said, "quote unquote," funding secured, and they were going to sell stocks at a premium of 420. 420, of course, having its own connotation, and it was like a joke turned into a big now criminal charges.
Well, I don't think we know the whole story, but here's the thing. I'm gonna put on my journalist hat. Full disclosure, I don't like Elon Musk, and I don't like him, and I've said that since the beginning. I think he's become unstable. That being said, I don't think he's not a genius. I don't think he's fun to talk about. I get this. But the problem is that something is going on. There's some instability going on with Elon Musk. What you're referring to, he tweeted out he thought he was going to take Tesla private. He thought he told everybody he had the funding from, was it Saudi Arabia? Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Didn't have it. Billions of dollars are lost. If you invested in Tesla, I feel your pain, and you have to know that your company's being run by a sort of a prototypical madman. We like madmen. They're usually pretty innovative. They're a lot of fun, but he is so unstable. There's something going on with him that I think the company is going to have to make a very, very hard decision and to most likely boot him from the company. This is not uncommon. We saw this happen with Uber a couple years ago. Of course, most famously, we saw it happen with Steve Jobs with Apple.
Right.
He has a lot of plates spinning, but I'll just say this: regardless of what I think happened, and regardless of what we know happened, I sense sadness, and I hope he's able to get some treatment for whatever is ailing him. There seems to be something going on that we're not aware of. He exhibits all the signs of someone with a massive drug problem, and I hope he gets some help for it. And I think it would be irresponsible to the stockholders and anyone on the board to allow Elon Musk to be the front of Tesla at this point. He is a liability in a way that I think would not make me feel comfortable being part of that organization. And I don't think I'm alone.
He certainly built up that company and a couple others, of course, surrounding him, with himself at the front. And love him or hate him, he is certainly part of the appeal of Tesla and SpaceX and more. So
he is a colorful guy, but I will say this. I've said this to you years ago, and I'm going to restate it now. I do think a large part of Tesla is built on a fraud and a scam of investor dollars, basically a digital Ponzi scheme to create an automobile company based on government subsidies. And for whatever reason, for whatever likelihood, that seems to have been exposed and dried up. And I think you see the funding problems with the new Roadsters and the inability of Tesla to deliver on their pre-orders is effectively proof that the scam has imploded. And
And
so
we will certainly see over the next couple of months what happens
Yes.
with Tesla. But I will say, music means that we are just about done here. Nathan, you have 10 seconds. Popzara, what's going on? What's the hot thing that people should check out there?
Well, Ben, before the show, you were very much interested in the brand new spanking, super expensive GeForce RTX gaming cards from our friends over at NVIDIA. We have reviews of the, what numbers are they? I should know this.
2080 Ti.
Yes, one's expensive and one's hella expensive. But they're supposed to make Laura Croft's hair silky smooth. If you want to read them, you can go to the Popzara, read both reviews. Tell us what you think. Some people seem to hate them, Ben, but you know how people are. Some people hate everything.
Right.
So Herman liked them.
Yep.
Herman liked them.
So absolutely go out there, check that out. It's right there on the banner. And everyone, once again, from Computer America, thank you so much for tuning in. And catch us here all next week, Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. Until then, have a great day. Nathan, thank you so much. Catch you here next month. And bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.